second lesson on ballads. I'm thinking that the lesson's going to be 10 to 15 minutes. The room that I'm currently sitting in is very cold, so I don't want this to go too long. All right. People that are watching the video, it's happening right now. People that aren't watching the video, it's also happening right now. Matt, put away your phone. It's happening. Doing this. Ready? Lesson 2. Let's go. Okay. All right. So, story of ballads starts, I don't know when it starts. Nobody really knows when it starts. But 1711 is an important date because this is when ballads started to be collected in England and Scotland. And the guy who decided to collect them was Joseph Addison. And if you are watching the video right now, take a minute to just appreciate the sass and attitude of Joseph Addison. Look at that hair. Look at it. Look at that sleeve. It's a fancy sleeve. That is a fancy hairdo. So he is, as his expression would indicate, I think he's kind of just over it. He's over it all. The Enlightenment just happened. The Enlightenment focused on, like, reason, rationality, the scientific method, and he's just having none of it. He wants nothing to do with that. And a lot of the writing, like the poetry during the Enlightenment, kind of reflected those same ideals. There were a lot of societal critiques, and Joseph Addison he's had enough. He's bored by all of it. So he decides, and I think that, like, I halfway think I would want to be friends with him because, I mean, look at him. He looks amazing if you're watching the video. But I also think that he was maybe a jerk because this is why I think he was maybe a jerk. So he decides that he wants something like real and true and pure. He's like, I know who has the truth. It's not in these, like, fancy ideas from the Enlightenment or my refined poet friends. It's the simple poor folk. They have the truth. So Joseph Addison decides that they're going to study the ballads of the poor people because this is somehow, like, close to nature, close to something pure and real and true. So he collects a troupe of people that I really hope looked like him. I imagine that they did look like him because I don't think that he would hang out with people that weren't as fancy as he was. I mean, look at him. Look at the sleeve. Look at that sleeve. So he collects his Joseph Addisons, and this is what, like, really I think is so funny. So there's a bunch of, like, scholar, poet people, and they all look like Joseph Addison in my imagination. They do. And they decide to go, like, they go into the cities, because that's where these poor common folk are. They work in the cities. But at the time, a lot of England was country, so they also go into the country to collect ballads. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to collect ballads. And they also go into the border and into the Scottish lowlands and the Scottish highlands. And you can see from the slide, if you're looking at the slide, that the Scottish highlands are really like a rugged, mountainous terrain. And I just think it's really funny to picture them like in their fancy outfits walking through the mountains to try to collect these ballads. So what they were actually looking for, ballads were an oral tradition, but they were also written, and they were called broadsides. That's supposed to say broadsides. It does say broadsides, but not well, but broadsides. Okay. So these were just a part of the culture for everybody. I kind of think of the ballads and the broadsides as maybe like pop music, maybe. So everybody knows about it, everybody kind of listens to it, but it's not considered the most, like, refined form of music. It's not considered super elegant. So that's kind of what ballads were. People sang them in their lives when they worked, when they were at home. It's just part of the culture. And for a lot of people, the broadside, this printed out paper with a ballad on it, they were probably their first literary experience. At this time, about 75% of the population, they were rural farmers. They were farmers. So they were reading maybe like almanacs or things like that, but probably not a lot of Enlightenment poetry. I'm not saying that to be snob, it's just probably the truth. Like some were, I'm sure that some were, but like many weren't. So they're reading these broadsides. They were called the Comics and Art of the Poor, and what they were, as you can see, they were just like a single sheet of paper that was mass-produced, and it would have the lyrics to a ballad, and then it would have like a suggested tune to sing the ballad in. So, like, I don't know, like think of like a drinking song. They all have kind of the same, or maybe don't, but also do a little bit. Like, they all have the same sort of tune. So it would be like if it was a drinking song, they would like give the lyrics and then say, suggested that you sing it in this kind of tune. Like I said, nobody really knows when they started. Some people think maybe court jesters in the Middle Ages started them. Some people think that they were started later by like common folk. I put air quotes around common folk, like just people. Just regular people. They're regular people, so I don't sound snobby. I'm a common folk. I'm not snobby. Regular people. Okay. It doesn't really matter. I did read an article that said likely explanation would be that they were probably a combination of both. So maybe some started in the Middle Ages, and then people, as time went on, carried on those songs and changed them and made their own songs. It doesn't really matter, like I said. Just interesting. So that's kind of the overview of ballads as they existed in England and Scotland, and we're going to continue to the really important part of the lesson. So if you weren't listening, Matt, if you still have your phone out, put it away now. We're moving on to what's important, what I want you to know, what I want you to remember for class. Even say maybe what will be on your test. If that, like, I'm trying to threaten you so that you'll pay attention. Alright, so we're now going to focus on Appalachian music in the Americas. Why, you ask? Because I'm a proud American, and I think we should start our semester in British literature by talking about American stuff. And also because ballads have a very important role in the formation of our country. So Appalachian music originated with these English and Scottish ballads that we talked about, as well as Irish music, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't know anything about it. This obviously, Appalachian music is like what you would think of as maybe bluegrass music or Americana music, an early influencer of country music. Though I don't think Appalachian musicians would want to take credit for a lot of country music that's on the radio right now. Sorry if that's your jam. It's just, like, it's different. Okay. Alright, so how did these ballads get to America? You probably know this from history classes, so I'll be kind of brief here. But this is what I do want you to remember. So, during the colonial period, English and Scottish people came to the Americas. And about 1/3 to 2/3, so a very significant portion of them, came as indentured servants or slaves. So the indentured servants, I'm not a history person at all. It was always my worst subject. It's the only subject that I really didn't like in school. So if I, mess up something, just nod politely as you listen to this, and don't tell me in class that I messed up. Just let me think that I got everything right. Okay. So, like I said, during the colonial period, which was 1600 to 1775, before the Revolutionary War, obviously, most of the white Americans, or the white British and Scottish citizens that came to the colonial American colonies, There we go. Most of them came as, like I said, indentured servants or as slaves. And the indentured servants, they came over here because, I just read this, I want to try to get it right. Okay, there was some act, I don't know what it was called, the something act probably, in England, and it said that the rich people, the people who owned servants, were only allowed to pay them money. Like, they couldn't pay them in food or clothing and shelter. They had to pay them just money. And I think it was sold to these servants as like a good thing. Like, hey, the people that pay you, they have to just pay you money now. But what really happened, and this was probably the intention, was that the rich people no longer had to feed their servants, and they could just pay them like a lower wage and also not feed them, because it's never good to be poor. And so these people who were British servants decide that that's no good, so they're going to come to America because you can get paid still in food and shelter. But they didn't get paid in anything else when they got over here, so it was equally as bad to be poor in America. And I think that they started a revolt later, which is probably very important, but not that relevant to what we're talking about now. Also interesting to note that I think like a significant portion of Scottish people were brought over as slaves. They had a slave contract, which means they were slaves for, like, let's say 8 years. And these were a lot of, like, the criminal element of Scotland. They were slaves for, like, let's say 8 years. So it was different than slaves brought over from Africa who were just entered into, like, a contract of lifetime slavery. They had a period of being a slave for, like, maybe 7 or 8 years. So what is important is that when they came over, they brought the songs with them. And I want you to think about that. We're going to have some real Tumblr emotions right now, because I want you to think about that. So they're coming over like as servants and slaves, so that's no good. They're also just coming to a place that's completely new to them. They don't know. They're poor. They don't have a lot of power. And so they brought these songs, I think, as like I'm imagining as a piece of their home. Like your culture, the music you listen to, I think is a really important part of who you are as a person. So they exist now, and we get to listen to them in class because people who had nothing really work to preserve their culture and their tradition. So I want you to think about that. Also, as I go on to the next slide, this is also important. I want you to remember this. So Appalachian music kind of starts with these ballads. They did have a fiddle that was brought over, so they had a fiddle, and they would either sing them with like nothing, no accompaniment, or sometimes with a fiddle. And then later into the 18th century, there was an African-American influence on this Appalachian music, and specifically in the form of the banjo was introduced. So I think of the banjo as like a really American instrument, but because I had to do so much research for this, I know that the banjo actually originated in West Africa. It was a lute-like instrument, and a lute is a thing that you would recognize if you saw it. It's like a stringed instrument that they played in the Middle Ages. I don't know. You would know. It's like a fancy little, it's a lute. So they took like the lute body, and then they put a drum in the belly of the instrument. I don't know. Here, if you're looking at the video, here, they put the drum here and here, if you're looking at the video. So that was obviously, the drum was a part of the African musical culture. So they brought these two things together, and they brought the banjo to the United States when they were brought over as slaves. So, and a lot of people think of the African-American musical influence, or just Africans during this time, as being in like the southern colonies, but there was a significant population in the Appalachian area, and they did contribute to Appalachian music. So early American music was greatly influenced by African Americans, and there's a band that we're going to listen to next week, Monday or Tuesday, maybe Wednesday and Thursday as well, called the Carolina Chocolate Drops. They're really cool if you want to check them out. And they kind of try to revive older Appalachian works by African Americans, and they're a very good band. I think that you'll like them. But we're almost finished. The last thing that I want you to think about is in class, when this is all that you really have to like get from this. You don't have to remember anything. Maybe you want to remember Joseph Addison and his hairdo, but besides that, I want you to just think about like why this music exists, why Appalachian music exists, because people that were brought over here under like horrific circumstances fought to preserve their culture and their music. And I think that that is like, obviously it came out of something not good, but it's sort of like, can you say that it's nice that it came out of something so horrific like slavery and indentured servitude? But it's important. And so like think about that when we listen to them in class, and don't act foolish. Be respectful of this music and this musical tradition. All right, so 16 minutes. Sorry, that was a little long. All right, I'm very cold, and I will see you in class.